Atef, you mentioned this line, a fantastic line which everybody's sort of jumped on, all the critics have jumped on, which you say, in the wider Palestinian world, in the wider sort of Palestinian literary circles, Gaza became known in the 70s and 80s as the producer of short stories and oranges, or the exporter of oranges and short stories. The word export and publish are the same word in Arabic. Why is the short story so important to Gaza literature in particular?
Yeah, Gaza, after, let's say, the fall of Jaffa in 1948, became the main producer of orange and what remains of Palestine. So Gaza orange is nice as well. So as well as the Gaza short stories. But I mean, after the 1967, when Israel conquered the West Bank and Gaza and occupied them, most of the authors of West Bank and Gaza, they flee from the Gaza Strip and have great names, like our national poet Moin Seso. Yeah, he's one of our icons in literature, like Darwish and others. And Harun Hashim Rashid, if you know somebody familiar with Fairuz, she sang lots of his poetry, Fairuz. Harun Hashim Rashid, Ahmad Omar Shaheed, the novelist, Muhammad Al-Imari, the short story writer. All of those, they left Gaza, and no writers remained in Gaza. Of course, they left because they were be prosecuted or arrested by the Israeli authority, new authority, occupation authority. And until late 60s, because the war happened in 1967, so we didn't have authors there. Until late 60s, early 70s, a new generation of authors, they started to fill this vacuum. So, as much as poetry is attached to rhetoric and to national inspiration, we didn't have poetry at that time, because if you publish poetry, you will go to jail directly. And as novel is long, and we didn't have any publishing houses in Gaza, and it's hard to smuggle the novel to the outside press in Jerusalem, where we had our main printing shops until now even, or to Beirut, where PLO was based, or to Cairo, which is the headquarter of the Arab country, or the capital of the Arab culture. So the only form which was suitable for the Gazans at that time was short story. So they could write a story of 3-4 pages, and they could smuggle it to Jerusalem, to Al-Fajr newspaper, or Al-Nahar newspaper, or Al-Quds newspaper, the main 3 newspapers in Palestine at that time. Only Al-Quds remains from them. Or to Al-Bayadir al-Adabi, which is the literary Bayadir supplement, actually, which happens that I published my first 6 in it in 1990, when I was 17 years old at that time. So, yeah. So the only form that was available to the Gazans, to the authors, is to write a short story. So they were writing short stories, sending them to the publications, either in Jerusalem or Beirut, where PLO will take care of publishing those books, or to Cairo, definitely, where as well Arab and Palestinian publishers will take care of them. So the common thing was saying, in the common circles, they were saying Gaza at that time was producing or exporting orange to us, to the outside, and short story. And amazingly, the Gazans continued to write short story novels, even when they started to write novel by the late 80s. Early, few novels came up at the early 80s, but most of the novels started to come in the late 80s. They were long stories, not novels. They were only 70 pages, 60 pages, 80 pages, because they got used to this style of short narration. And even some authors, they have to change their names, like Garib Asqalani, the one we include in the book. His name is Ibrahim Zand. So he has to change his name, because otherwise he will be followed. And because most of them, they were teachers in schools. Abdullah himself, he was a teacher. Garib Asqalani was a teacher at that time. So it was not allowed to participate in, if you teach in schools, to participate in national, let's say, struggle. And the mission of literature at that time was more or less national. Because as Mahmoud Darwish, remember, some of you are familiar with Darwish, no? Our great poet. In his famous poem in 1967, Tufadda Tukam, when he wrote this dialogue poetry with her, he says, we're not writing poetry, we are fighting. This was تعرف أحد بيعرف عربي يا محمد قصيدة وطني ليس حقيبة وأنا لست مسافر يا شرح المكابر. It's his famous national poem when he says, my country is not a bag, I'm not a traveler, I'm wounded, blah, blah, blah. Then he says, we're not writing poetry. So there was a mission to the literature at that time. So most of even short stories at the time were directed toward portraying the situation in Gaza, about Gaza. So the only form, the only true reports which outside world talk about Gaza was through short story. And here comes the other role of short story. It depicted the situation in the camps and the situation under the curfews as Garib Asqalani does in his story, or Zaki Leila is doing as well, etc. It depicted the life in Gaza to the outside world, mainly through, of course, the publications outside. So in this sense, short story matters a lot in the development of the history of literature in the Gaza Strip.
And you mentioned at one point it was so tied up with the kind of national identity that Arafat himself was photocopying stories and distributing them.
Many of those stories actually they were distributed to the fighters and the PLO fighters in Lebanon or Jordan before that, in order to give them a sense of how does it feel to be under occupation. They're living diaspora, so those stories were depicting the under occupation life and the miserable life in the refugees camp, where when the Israeli authority took over the Gaza Strip, they never paved the street in Gaza until 1994, when the Arafat and the Palestinian National Authority, after Oslo Accords was established. And so in this sense, yeah, as I told you, short stories were introduced as reports about the situation there. And at the same time to show the creativity of the people there. And this is one of the messages of this book, actually, if I may say something else, is that one of the stereotypes about Gaza is that Gaza is producing violence, blood, attacks, wars, invasions. Yeah, this is what, and every day you open, not every day, at least once a week you will hear Gaza in the news. And you will hear it in this way. Either there is Israeli bombing, or there is Israeli rockets getting Palestinian rockets in response to Israeli attacks, etc., etc. But here we want to say something else, that Gaza produces literature, and there is a strong tradition of literature in Gaza, which is, it's one of the main springs of the river of the Palestinian literature. And it's not just people they wanted to write because they're luxurious. Sometimes it's dangerous to write. And as I said before, when you publish, you might go to jail. And before 1994. So the image of Gaza is that Gaza is producing news, producing wars, attacks, and this is how Gaza is associated in the minds of everyday person. I remember when I did my master in England and my PhD in Italy, and I remember when my friends wouldn't believe that when I was in Italy mainly, I stayed 4 years and a half. So sometimes I don't leave Gaza for 2 years. And when I leave the Gaza, it takes me, as Muhammad might know, 2 weeks to arrive home and 2 weeks to come. So they wouldn't know that, he might take the ticket from Florence, where I studied, the city of Florence in Italy, and he goes everywhere in Europe in the same night, by a train without being stopped. So he doesn't know most of them, they don't know the concept of borders. How does it matter in our life? The concept of limitedness, limitedness of the space. Like when you look to the sea, it's as I would say in my new novel, the sea is a nice painting in Gaza war. It means nothing. It's only a painting. It's very beautiful. You look into the sea, but you know that you cannot cross it. You cannot go further than 3 miles or 3 kilometers. I don't know how much miles are. Anyway, 3 kilometers.
1.6.
Yeah, 1.6. So even if you are a fisherman, the fishermen, when they cross to more than this, or at least they approach the 3 kilos, they started to be shooted against by the Israeli war boat. So even the sea itself is a sign of this limitedness, because it reminds you, as far as the world is wide, as far as the world exists behind me, it's your limit, the speech. So back to this. So when I was asked, how does it feel to live in Gaza, I used to say, it's like living in a piece of the news. I remember a friend of mine, now he immigrated to Canada. He's a Palestinian. And usually I would tell him, he's a good friend of mine. He's one of my best friends. I used to tell him, Gaza is a prison. And so he would tell me, it doesn't matter, the prison is small or big, it's a prison. Because the idea of a prison is the idea of incapacity or inability to cross outside. So this is a prison, even if it was 1 meter by 1 meter, like the cell I was in when I was in Israeli jails. This was 1991. Or if it's Gaza now, 300 kilometers. So the idea of this book, once again, to get out of all of this and to say there is nice literature in Gaza. There are people, young boys and girls, old men and old women, who write literature which reflects the reality, but at the same time, which talks about other things, other than national struggle, which is very important. It talks about love and hate. It talks about jealous. It talks about the human condition, which readers from outside Gaza can feel, even if they don't know the experience in Gaza.
Thank you.
It might be a question for Ron, I'm not sure, but are the stories available either in an Arabic version of the book or in different places? Are they available in Palestine, the stories that are in the book?
Yeah, most of the stories are published in separate, of course, collections of short stories of the authors. And you find at the first page, like I think 8 of them are published already, because 8 of them are published in different collections. I know 2, I think. 2 are not published in books yet, but they're published in the author's websites and going to be published in future books.
We are hoping to do an Arabic ebook.
Yeah, many people they ask if there is a collection counterpart of this in Arabic. I don't know if there is a need for readers. This is something else which we can discuss later. But I mean, yeah, we tried, as we said, many of the authors are highly acclaimed authors in the book, and some of them are very young, like the one girl she was reading right now. She didn't have a collection yet. She's going to have a collection in the future. But we wanted to present this, continuity in the production of literature in Gaza.
Was there a theme or a criteria for choosing the stories that you chose? You said that you looked at the quality of the stories. What was there an underlying theme that you found, or?
Always when you choose something, you will not be fair for everybody, definitely. Because we couldn't have like 20 or 25 authors. So we limited them first to 17 or 18. Then we started, within these 17s actually, we started to make the criteria, like to have generations, to have gender, to have the geography sometimes. Because many of the stories, they depict different geographical, as Ra was saying in another meeting, we tried to present political geography, or what was it? Literary geography of Gaza. Like Rafah, Khan Yunis, Gaza, Jabalia, Shatib. So, but at the beginning we had like 25. But then I made up of 17 of them. And of course, literary quality matters a lot. It's the main criteria, because you want to produce literature first. It's not, we don't want authors who talks politics. We don't authors who talks like they talk in their own personal blog, personal writing, narrative. So we wanted literature which can present itself as complete short story, a short story which fit the criteria of the literary genre, which is called short story. Then when we had this, we minded the generations, the gender, the topics. Like some of them, they talk national stuff, like Zaki Leila's story and Abdullah Tay, definitely, with allegorical, of course, form. Some of them are more social, like Muna Abu Sharik, the story, it's about social life. Some of them are very personal, like Najla Atalla's story, the prostitute of Gaza. It's very personal, very feminist, very, and some of them, they talk about daily life as it is, as I do it with Talal Shawish and Nusra Khatib, the other, right? And some of them are about the current different social situation, like Nairuz, the other girl, she was doing. So, yeah, within these 17s, we limited them to 10, taking in consideration these divisions.
I think certain themes emerged as well. I think there was a very strong sense of claustrophobia. There was a lot of, a couple of stories dealt with how people became obsessive compulsive almost. There was one story called You and I, which is about a woman who just on her walk to university just counts everything, counts drain, manhole covers and drain covers and everything that she passes. And there's another story called The Dead Numbers, which is again somebody obsessing about numbers. And this sort of this cautiousness, and there is a sense of claustrophobia, a sense of insecurity and the need to impose order on things as well that sort of emerges.
It seems to us a fairly ongoing process where nothing is changing in terms of Israel's lock on Gaza and the hope for the people. Is that the situation, or is there any sign of developments for the benefit of the Palestinians in Gaza?
I don't know. This has to touch upon the whole long-lasting question in the Middle East of the future of this question, which I believe, as somebody who comes from Gaza, I grew up in Gaza, refugee camp, and I still live there anyway. I got my education abroad, but I returned back home, and I love this country. I could live in Europe actually, but I don't have any place else to live. I feel comfortable in Gaza. Of course, I feel danger. I feel under danger. I always tell Ra about this feeling of uncertainty. You cannot plan anything in the future. But I love this little piece of land, which is available for me as a country at the end. But I mean, this Middle East conflict, the only way to solve it and my underline was, two-state solutions. Because Israel did every best it can do to make this only possible way impossible. And I was to the West Bank the first time. I studied in Berzeh, 1990 until 1996. Yeah, the university was closed by the Israelis, so we were studying in private houses, etc., until it was open, 1994. And I know West Bank at that time. I managed to return in 2000, actually, November last year, actually, the first time. I was allowed to go to Ramallah. You don't believe how West Bank was changed. You cannot have a state there. You have settlements in every corner. Even sometimes you have two settlers in the mountain, and you have 200 soldiers protecting them. I saw it by my eyes. I wrote about it 2 articles. And they changed all the signs in the streets in Hebrew. Like you have 2 soldiers, 2 settlers in the mountain. They say the settlement of X. So there is a big village around Palestinian where you have thousands living since 1,000 years. No, but their name is not mentioned there. So I'm saying the only possible solution was, underlined was, is a 2-state solution, in which deal the Palestinian, as I believe, I'm not saying this is the absolute truth, but this is what I believe, they gave up 80% of their homeland in order to negotiate for 20%. And still the Israelis want to negotiate that 20% with them. They want to share them. I realize there is no fair peace, but there is possible peace. Because the fair peace is for my grandma to go back to Jaffa. This is fair peace. At least to apologize for her tear and her suffering when she flew on the beach from Jaffa to Gaza. But there is possible peace. Possible peace says we are 2 nations. We happen to live together by mistakes of history. So we have to survive together. We have to have 2-state solutions. But unfortunately, this 2-state solution is made impossible nowadays. And if you make a survey among the Palestinians in 1995, you have 83% of the Palestinians they were in support of the peace process and the 2-state solution. Now we wouldn't get 20% because of what Israel did. And of course, of what the international community is doing. The international community is ready to move all airplanes, all crafts, all ships to kick Saddam out of Iraq, which I believe they should do this. Or to trouble Saddam Hussein, or to trouble Gaddafi, or to trouble Mubarak. But they're not ready to do anything to end the last occupation history. I know there is no fair peace. I know this very well. I'm a political scientist. I'm very realist. I studied lots of history, lots of politics. I'm very realist. But then, the future of Gaza cannot be thrown in the sea as Rabin once dreamt. And now, I was talking to actually last day when we had a walk in the countryside, that the only possible way is to have one solution for both nations. Because two-state solution wouldn't survive a minute. Because if you go to West Bank, I'm in favor of two-state solutions, personally. And always in my writings, academic writing, I go for it. But they made it impossible. And they don't miss any opportunity to make it impossible. So I think it is up to the international community either to force Israel, and mind the word force. Israel should be obliged to obey to peace, to adhere to peace. It's not a matter of a choice, because this international community made Israel by a decision by the United Nations. Israel was made by a decision in 1947 and by a British Balfour Declaration in 1917. This was 100 years ago, 97 years ago. So the international community should be a responsibility towards peace. And believe me, you cannot solve any issue in the Middle East without the Palestinian-Israeli conflict issue. Dictators, they rule in the name of the Palestinian-Israeli. No? Yeah, that's what they say, dictator. Oh, how come you want democracy and Palestine is occupied? And they're saving all the money of the nation to build the army and to destroy the army in order to build it again. Because we want to liberate Palestine, and they didn't liberate 1 centimeter of Palestine. Okay? So dictators rule in the name of this conflict. Injustice is made in the name of this conflict. And everything is made in the name of this conflict. So it's up to the international community, which made this conflict actually, since 1917, to intervene, to impose peace. I don't believe that we can get rid of the Israeli who came to Palestine. We're human beings. At least I'm in Manchester, I don't feel foreign. So we live as a human. So they are my neighbors, and we have to survive together, by the way, if you like it or not. But at the end, they don't accept this, or at least the right government, or all the governments in Israel, they don't accept this. So I think the international community should intervene to impose peace on both sides. I want peace, but I cannot want peace forever. And this is how public surveys can reflect on the results, of having I remember my mom, she died anyway. My brother was in the prison, Israeli jail, and he died actually. He was released and assassinated. So my mom, when peace accords started in 1990, I remember this scene very well. She went running celebrating the peace process because she thought that Naeem, my brother, would be released. And always I quote her in this, actually. My last novels, in the 2 novels I'm quoting her saying, if Oz is going to release my son, I am with Oslo. And she went to walking 4 kilometers to welcome Arafat when he came from abroad. And she died without Naeem being released. He was released later anyway. But she was at that time 4 years in the grave. So she couldn't enjoy this happiness which she dreamt of. So once again, without having hope, you cannot survive. And hope is the water which we feed our tree with, which is our life, this tree. So we always should have hope. But at least, what was done for us is unfair. And we cannot unfair this, or return it as fair alone. Thank you very much.